Long ago, in a small village surrounded by thick, dark forest, there lived a boy named Kato. Kato was no different from any other child, except for one thing. He was afraid of everything. He feared the dark, the unknown, and even the sound of his own footsteps when he walked home alone. His mother always told him, "Fear is a monster, Kato. If you feed it, it will grow. If you give it space, it will become permanent." But Kato didn't listen. The village's legend. The villagers spoke of an ancient spirit named Mnyuesi, a creature of fear. It lived in the darkest corner of the forest and in the quietest corner of one's heart. They said, if you let fear consume you, Mnyuesi would appear. It didn't attack like the beast or roar like thunder. It whispered. It whispered doubts, lies, and nightmares until it made itself a home in your mind. The old village elder often warned, Mnyuesi is a shadow that waits. It grows where fear is planted. But remember this, fear only wins if you allow it to stay. One night, as the village slept, Kato awoke to a strange noise, a faint tapping at his window. Tap, tap, tap. His room was dark, and the trees outside swayed in the wind like skeletal arms. Kato pulled his blanket tighter around himself and whispered, "It's just the wind. It's just the wind." But the tapping grew louder. Then a low voice, soft and cold, whispered his name. Kato! Fear surged through him like icy water. His heart raced and he squeezed his eyes shut. But when he opened them, he saw it, a shadow in the corner of his room, darker than the night itself. It didn't move, but it seemed to grow taller, spreading across the walls. Who are you?" Kato stammered. The shadow spoke, its voice like dry leaves rustling. "I am your fear. You've called me here, and I will stay." From that night on, Kato was never alone. The shadow was always there, in his room, behind doors, in the forest, and in his dreams. No one else could see it, but Kato could feel it watching. It whispered constantly, "You are weak. They will laugh at you. You cannot face the dark." Kato began to avoid everything. He stopped going to the forest, stopped talking to friends, and stayed in the house all day. The more he listened to the shadow, the larger it grew, until it seemed to fill every part of his world. One night, as he sat alone, shivering in fear, the shadow laughed. "I told you I would stay. I am permanent now." Desperate, Kato finally went to the village elder, who sat quietly beneath a large tree. The elder looked at Kato, his pale face, sunken eyes, and trembling hands, and said softly, "You have let the monster grow, haven't you?" "I didn't mean to," Kato whispered, "but now it's too late." The elder shook his head. "Fear only stays if you give it space. It has no powers of its own. You have been feeding it, Kato, believing its lies, listening to its voice. But you can fight it. You can take back your mind." "How?" Kato asked. The elder handed him a small candle and said, "Go back to where it began. Face the shadow in the corner. Fear the shadow for one last time, but do not run. Light this candle, and you will see that fear cannot survive in the light of courage." That night, Kato returned to his room, clutching the candle with shaking hands. The shadow was waiting for him, taller than ever, spreading across the ceiling. It laughed darkly. "You've come back to me. You cannot fight me. I am your fear. I will always stay." Kato's knees wobbled. but he remembered the elder's word. He struck the match and lit the candle. At first, the flame was small, flickering weakly. But as Kato stood taller, staring into the heart of the shadow, the light grew stronger. "I am not weak," Kato shouted. "You are not real." The shadow hissed and trembled. "Stop," it snarled. "I will not listen to you anymore." Kato's voice grew louder, filled with a strength he didn't know he had. "You have no power over me." As the light from the candle spread, the shadow began to shrink, its edges dissolving like smoke in the wind. It screeched in fury, "No, I will come back. I will always come back." Kato held the candle higher. "Then I will face you every time." With one final cry, the shadow vanished, leaving Kato alone in his room. The darkness was gone, replaced by a steady glow of his candle. From that day on, Kato understood what the elder had meant. Fear is a monster that grows when you give it space. It whispers lies and waits for you to believe them. But fear cannot survive where courage stands strong. Kato still felt afraid sometimes, but now he knew the truth. Fear would only win if he allowed it to stay. And so, whenever he felt the shadow creeping back into his mind, Kato would light a candle and whisper to himself, "I am not weak. You are not real." The story lives on, and so it is told to this day. Fear is a monster, but it is a monster of your own making. If you give it space, it will become permanent. But if you face it with courage, it will fade, for fear cannot survive in the light of truth. Thanks for watching and listening. My name is Nyar Obura.